to let everyone enter in. Right, we'll give a few more seconds to let folks enter in, and then we will get kicked off. Okay. All right, I'm so excited to see so many names joining us on this session today. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're calling in from. Welcome everyone to our second session in our Innovating to Scale series. Now, for those of you that were not with us last time, let me just start with a quick overview. Innovating to Scale is a 4-part series brought to you by my team at CASE at Duke University in partnership with the Kirby Foundation. And so I want to start by saying our immense gratitude to the Kirby Foundation for their leadership and support of organizations working to create strong and healthy communities, and for their support of this series that we're offering. And so for those of you that were here with us last time, you know how these sessions work. For those of you that are new, we have an hour together. And in that hour, we're going to start with an introduction. Well, I will offer some best practices and frameworks from our research at CASE on the topic being covered today, creating an innovation culture to drive scale. And after those short introductory comments, we always bring in a featured impact leader that will share insights from actually doing the work of innovating to scale. In their experience, what went right, what went wrong, and sharing their advice for you. So that's the format we'll follow in each of these sessions in the webinar series: introductory remarks with frameworks and best practices that you can hopefully take away with you, but then spending the majority of our time in conversation with an impact leader to take the frameworks and bring them to life through insights and lessons learned. So I want to kick us off by bringing us back quickly to our first session that we had 2 weeks ago. So for those of you that were with us, a little bit of a recap. For those of you that were not able to join that first one, an opportunity to join in on the conversation. So in session 1, we started off with the story of One Acre Fund to demonstrate what we mean by scaling and innovation. In its first year, One Acre Fund helped provide 38 smallholder farmers with inputs and training to help them improve their yields and therefore increase their incomes. Within 4 years, One Acre Fund had reached 31,000 farmers. 10 years after that, more than 1 million. And so One Acre Fund could have continued growing on this path, bringing their inputs and training to more farmers. But they realized they would only make a dent in the magnitude of the problem that they were trying to solve. The magnitude of that problem for One Acre Fund was 50 million smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa alone. And so One Acre Fund focused on scaling their impact in new ways, using innovation as a tool, testing and experimenting with new and better ways of creating impact. Things such as training government agricultural workers who could reach many more farmers than One Acre could do alone by hiring their own staff. Or advocating for policy change in ways that would help millions of farmers, and so much more. And so we share the story of One Acre Fund because it's a great illustration of the power of innovation to drive impact at scale. And at the core of that story. And truly, I would say almost any story that we tell in any session, at the core of the story are the people that came up with the ideas, that tested and piloted new solutions and pathways to impact, that executed on new approaches, that had the skills to pivot from direct service to training government workers to policy advocacy and so much more. And so that's what we're focusing on today. We're going to dive deeper into the work around the people and the culture that drives innovation to scale. As a leader, for those of you that are listening in today, your job is to attract, align, and empower the right people to achieve and scale your work. Now, those people, of course, include the staff that are so integral to the work that you do each and every day. But I want to make sure we're also grounded that when we say people and creating culture, we absolutely mean the staff that you hire, but also board members, volunteers, external partners, and so many others that are critical to achieving the impact that you seek. And when we have the opportunity here at CASE to speak with leaders of different impact organizations, people are at the heart of what they focus on again and again. So I've put two quotes up here from two impact leaders that we respect and have worked with, just illustrating the importance of people to impact and scale. And so with those quotes, everything starts and ends with people, and that's what we're going to focus on today. How can you ensure that you have the right people and the right culture to drive innovation at scale? And so typically, as we do in these sessions, wanting to provide just a very simplified framework to help you think about the topics and questions that you need to address as you are creating a culture and staffing to drive innovation at scale. And so the simple framework that we're going to present to you and talk through in our conversation today talks about creating an innovation culture in two levels. One is around enabling innovation. Before the innovations even happen, what can you do as a leader to set the stage, to create the environment in which innovation is likely to be identified and excel? And so a few things under the enabling vision, innovation. The first is the need to set the vision as a leader, setting an inspiring vision and North Star to push the limits of what is possible when it comes to scale for your work, and encouraging staff, inspiring them to innovate to meet this vision. A second is around cultivating curiosity and learning. How do you create a culture of curiosity and learning within your organization so that your people are open to new ideas, are continuously questioning and asking, what if? How are you helping carve out space to test those ideas? Having a culture where you're embracing failure and so much more. And then lastly, in enabling innovation, thinking about strategically structuring staff and board to ensure that you have the right people to think innovatively, to drive towards scale. And of course, once all of that comes into place, then as a leader, you actually have to help implement those innovations. And so again, three topics or points around implementing innovation. The first is around enabling experimentation and managing risk. As your organization and your people are driving those innovative ideas and doing things differently than how they've done in the past, how do you as a leader embrace the experimentation and manage the risk along the way? The second is around evolving and aligning your staff. So we've got staff on both sides, right? Strategically structuring in the enabling side, making sure you have the right people on board to drive innovation. And then when innovation and scale is happening, make sure you are involving the people along the way. That might mean training, that might mean bringing in new people, but making sure you have the skills to implement innovation at scale. And then finally, making sure that you are bringing everyone along and managing change throughout this process. So again, just a very quick framework to help us guide our conversation today and some of your thinking and questioning as you work to create an innovation culture to drive scale. We are thrilled today that we will have Maria Kim joining us to share her experience and lessons learned on empowering people and culture through innovations and pivots. Maria is currently the president and CEO of REDF, an organization that provides capacity building, community, and capital to what are called employment social enterprises. Businesses that provide jobs and training to individuals facing significant barriers to employment, such as the trauma of homelessness, being formerly incarcerated, and much more. Maria came to REDF 3 years ago after spending 15 years at the Chicago-based Cara Collective, one of the employment social enterprises in the REDF portfolio. At Cara, she was most recently their CEO as well. And so in conversations with Maria today, we're going to focus on both her time at Cara in Chicago and with REDF as a national organization here in the US. So I want to just spend 1 or 2 more minutes setting the stage for that conversation. I want to just talk a little bit about some of the innovations and pivots that we're going to discuss in the conversation with Maria. There's a lot to understand about Cara Collective, about REDF, about all the evolutions and adaptations along the way. And so I just want to kind of ground us a little bit in some of those innovations to tell you the story. All right, so with Cara Collective, Cara began in 1991 as a small program coaching and preparing people for interviews and referring them to open positions. So a job placement and training retention program. From those origins, Cara saw many evolutions and adaptations over its first decade. But in 2005, they saw an opportunity to not only train and refer people to other companies, but actually to create jobs and hire themselves. So in 2005, Cara launched Clean Slate, which transforms the lives of thousands of individuals in the greater Chicago area by hiring them to create clean and safe streets through litter abatement and graffiti removal, snow removal, etc. And we'll also probably touch on another innovation at Cara Collective. The team responded to demand from community-based organizations in other regions. They were getting outreach from other regions in the US saying, how can we take the Cara model and implement it in our own communities? And so in 2016, Cara Collective worked with an organization in Fort Wayne, Indiana, to co-create and launch the first affiliate in what would become the Cara Affiliate Program. And now at REDF, Maria and her team are in the middle of planning for some strategic pivots to reach the next level of opportunity and potential. Okay, so what I want to do is I am going to stop sharing here now that I've hopefully set the stage well for our conversation. I'm going to welcome Maria to come online with us, and we're going to kick off the conversation. As always on these webinars, for everyone that's listening in, last time you did a great job of giving me some incredible questions in the Q&A chat on your screen. So feel free to send those questions in. I'll track those along the way and bring them into our conversation. But Maria, let me kick things off. So I just gave a highly unsatisfying, very high level overview of just a few of the innovative shifts that you helped lead at Cara and at REDF. So we're going to dig into all of that more deeply in the next 45 minutes, but I want to start at the beginning. So I just said a few minutes ago in the opening that it's critical for leaders to set a vision to drive innovation and scale. So what did that look like for you?
Thank you for the question, Erin, and thanks so much for having me. A little confession before I dive into that answer. As you were going through your
I love to
framework,
start off with a good confession. Where are we
yeah,
going?
I mean, like, here's the juice. So as you were going through that framework, I was thinking to myself, wow, here's a very nice list of 6 things that maybe I haven't done so well. But in the rearview mirror, I've got lots of lessons along the way. So would love to kind of opine on those. Another confession is I'm more of a COO. So I'm a CEO in a COO's body. So to
Mhm.
the extent that folks in your audience are more operators than they are kind of the visionary, kapow, I'm your person. I'm going to show you how to translate both of those things towards a commonly held goal. Um,
Which I love because we know that's where the magic happens. We need the vision, but we need to translate it into action as well.
absolutely,
So
absolutely. So
I
I'm
appreciate the confessions to begin us.
greasing the skids. But to tie that back to kind of the origin story of Clean Slate, and thank you for the setup of what was once the CARA program that eventually opened up to a multitude of social enterprises that became the CARA Collective. When we were at that precipice of Clean Slate, this is what we were up against. There were, and perhaps remain, approximately 600,000 people in the larger metropolitan Chicago area struggling in poverty. There was also 20,000 people returning from incarceration to the city of Chicago, largely to 7 neighborhoods on the south and west sides of the city. So the kind of poverty concentration continued to increase and increase and increase. And in the face of that, we didn't want to be a spectator to the challenge. To your point, we wanted to be an active part of the solution. And so we opened what is now known as Clean Slate, a social enterprise in the litter abatement business, as you described. So my first lesson to the group is for us to start Clean Slate. Our inspiration was to go research what are the good operations across the country that might be inspo for us. And in that case, we found the Doe Fund out of New York, and we studied its model. And then we thought, well, what are the tweaks and twacks that we want to do here in Chicago that make that model our own? So first lesson for me was copy and paste and then edit, right? You don't need to start from scratch to be on your pathway to scale. And to your point about vision for innovation, at the time we did not have this vision, but this was the kind of first seedling to help us think through, well, what is the vision of the future? And we landed on a vision that is fuel a courageous national movement to eradicate relational and financial poverty. A courageous national movement to eradicate relational and financial poverty. It was a vision that's like, damn, okay, let's go, and it compelled us to kind of think differently about opportunities for the future. And so the second kind of inflection point that you set up in the intro was the affiliate model, what is now known as Cara Plus. And the inspiration behind Cara Plus is, we had been in this work of helping folks not just get jobs, but get and keep good jobs and transform their whole families and communities and relationships and all the things along the way that we started to get known, no longer a best kept secret, but folks that were trying to do the same type of kind of poverty eradication in their own communities were calling us and saying, hey, could we pop over? Could we swing by? And in that first inflection, we had a few calls from the Lutheran Social Services of Indiana out of Fort Wayne that had called our chief program officer and was just like knocking on the door saying, how do we take what you all have established as a kind of defendable and thriving program model and replicate it here in this community? And he was in the middle of a leadership development program for which he was craving a capstone project that could help him take what he's learning, the frameworks that we learn in school, but apply them to an existing and live and vibrant kind of case. And he decided to have this first practice run be his capstone project. And we gave him the latitude and the space and the place, the creativity to do that. And it was so successful that we leaned more into that work and have since replicated once again in Atlanta, Georgia, with what is now Kara's second affiliate, and that has spawned all sorts of other permutations and fun things along the way. But I'll stop there just to give you a little teaser of what's up.
This is why I love doing this webinar series, but generally hosting these sorts of conversations. Such rich stories and learning and experiences. And I know, Maria, you started us off with the caveats of like, you know, I don't know that I did all those things. Looking back, I can share some lessons learned, but that's the whole point of this, of like, how do we look back and think about what did we do well and what might we do differently, and let everybody in the audience, and that's learning from us, avoid some of those mistakes the first time around. But already such wisdom and insights coming out of the very first question. So hearing you talk about, you know, setting that bold vision for the organization. I mean, I think your quote was, I'm probably going to misquote you as we go, but something along the lines of, we didn't want to be a spectator to the challenge. The 20,000 formerly incarcerated coming into those 7 neighborhoods, 600,000 people in poverty. And of course, Kara was having an impact on that at the time, but setting a bolder vision of getting off the sidelines, really embracing that challenge and fueling the courageous movement that you talked about. And then I love the insights around, you know, sort of copy and paste and then edit, you know, looking at I think you said the Doe Fund and their program and trying to adapt that for your needs. And I know you and I have talked before a lot about the idea that innovation does not have to equal invention, right? It doesn't have to be brand new and a shiny new thing. And so I love that example from you. So you kicked us off talking about the vision to motivate bigger thinking at Kara. But I think we also know, like, this is when, you know, you're going from the visionary hat that I know you do have, though you deny it, the visionary hat to the operator hat, right? The vision and the inspiration is critical, but it's not enough, right? So in order to enable the innovating to scale approach, we have to create the right enabling environment. And part of that means creating and embedding a culture of learning and testing and experimenting and coming up with new ideas. So can you share for us, as you reflect back, a few lessons around that idea of creating and embedding a culture for innovation?
Absolutely. And I might double click on what you said about not conflating innovation and invention. And I can't remember if the origin of this quote is Rockefeller, but at any rate, the quote goes something like this: people often confuse innovation with invention. Innovation is not necessarily the creation of something that is entirely net new. It is actually more recombinant, which I had to look up that word, but basically what that means is taking what already exists and kind of recombining it in a new way. So if I use that premise, we were recombinant at one inflection point in our growth at Kara when we started a social enterprise called 180 Properties. And what 180 Properties was effectively, in the wake of the housing crisis in our country, the innovation was, well, how do we make lemonade out of these lemons? And what we could see was that there were a bunch of properties that needed to be preserved. If they weren't preserved post an untimely foreclosure, then they became spaces and places where bad things occurred that made our neighborhoods less safe, et cetera. So how could we both be a part of the property preservation industry and create community transformation at the same time? And so we got in that business. It was an adjacency to our current capabilities at Clean Slate. So it was kind of close in skill set, close in capabilities, but it was also in a domain where we weren't subject matter experts. So the smart thing to do was, how do we strategically partner with an entity that does have that capability? So you don't go too far over your skis in a space where you don't have domain expertise. So we became joint venture partners with Mercy Housing that did have that strategic expertise. And then we were kind of the Reese's Pieces, I guess, of social enterprise. We took our goods, they took their goods, and together we created 180 Properties. Now, that sounds like an awesome story, and it was for a while. This was a booming business that, frankly, generated a ton of earned revenue from financial institutions that wanted to be a part of the recovery post the foreclosure process. Awesome sauce. And then our business model had to shift because of shifts in the dynamic of that industry, and we found ourselves with a model that was not good overlap to our mission. If our mission was to create jobs and employment experiences for people overcoming the toughest barriers to employment, the business model we had to become didn't create as many of those opportunities. We also encountered a bunch of cash flow challenges. Fast forward, we had to sunset that enterprise in 2014 or so. The reason why I share that is because you also asked about, well, what are the enabling aspects of a culture and an environment that help you not only kind of survive through challenges like this, but also create the conditions in which those types of outcomes are not just okay, but then used to fuel for future learning. So in the wake of the sunsetting of 180 properties, obviously we were a little shy to innovate in the same ways that we might have in the past. And so we still embrace the spirit of experimentation. Our head of Clean Slate at the time was part of a circular economy kind of club where he was learning from other folks. How are you using your enterprise to divert waste from our streams and actually create employment opportunities through that exercise? And he wanted to start a book recycling and reselling business because we had all of this inflow of folks that wanted to donate to us all of these books. So we said, okay, let's do that. We called it Chapter 2 to kind of allude to the next generation of a business that can occur, the next generation of a person that can occur through the power of these kinds of work. But we said, Brady, with your experiment, let's put some guardrails on it. We want you to do you. We want you to take all the lessons from this kind of recycling work group that you're a part of and experiment with this, but let's confine it with a specific kind of go, no go metric so that we protect ourselves for the pain of what we may have just experienced through 180 properties while still doing the creative work to try to unlock a new solution. And so we did have a go, no go. How many jobs would be created through this business, both in kind of the warehousing work and the e-commerce part of the work, and the timing within which we would be cash flow positive. So we set 2 goals, and sad face, we didn't hit those goals. But the bravery is that we stuck to our go, no go, and then we, turned down Chapter 2, if you will. And we also set it up in such a way that it was insulated. We started it as a line of business on Clean Slate's P&L, as opposed to standing up a whole enterprise to, again, protect the nature of the experiment and have it be self-contained in such a way that we could mitigate risk while also inspiring and creating the room for creativity too.
Woo, there's so much gold in that answer. Good stories and a lot of things I want to unpack. Let me stay on the culture topic for a minute. So really great examples of creating a culture that embraces trying things and being open to fail, but knowing that when you fail, you are going to learn from that and apply those learnings in the future. So very healthy innovation culture criteria there, I guess I would say. There's a great question in the Q&A from Jennifer where she's asking, how has your willingness, this is sort of like your personal leadership, right? How has your willingness to be vulnerable with your team fostered, or I would add hurt, the innovation across the culture and the team?
Oof, Jennifer, I don't know if I know you, but I'll just confess to you that I'm a crier. Like I feel the things, perhaps to the chagrin of some of my colleagues, but I do feel the things. And so I'm not sure, but one of my big go-to statements is we can be both a work in progress and a masterpiece at the same time. And I say that to say that, our sector, for whatever reason, I can't quite put my finger on it, also suffers from this desire for perfectionism. And I think some of that is rooted in the challenges that we're up against are so big that we want to make sure it's so right and tight before we bring something to bear to market. But we can't kind of hold that to our core always, because we end up perhaps not unlocking the solution at just the right time, where good enough might have been great for so many people. And that is an urgency in and of itself. So uh, perhaps just being able to be open about the fact that perfect is the enemy of good is a little bit of what creates some of those culture conditions for change and innovation.
Absolutely. And I think the enemy of, perfect is the enemy of the good can sometimes be a hard pill to swallow, as you're saying, for those of us in the impact space. What the issues that we're dealing with have real life consequences, people's lives, the environments, poverty, on and on. So it can be really challenging to embrace that concept. But what I heard in your previous answer also, though, is that you have to manage and mitigate the risks as you go along. So yes, perfect is the enemy of the good, but we're just not, going to willy-nilly try a bunch of different things and cause harm as we go. So we're not going to get hung up on perfect. We're going to try to innovate towards new and better solutions, as you were saying, but also managing that risk along the way. And so that's, part of what we were saying in the introduction was, certainly as you're implementing innovation, you need to think about embracing experimentation and managing that risk. And so what I heard you say before, I'm going to summarize, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong, but your approach to sort of embracing that experimentation and managing that risk along the way, your example of Brady and the book business, right? Like set clear guardrails to enable that experimentation, but mitigate the risks. So the go, no go criteria. One of those being very concretely in that example, the time, the amount, 18 months or whatever it was to get to cash flow positive, like very clear criteria on how long we're going to experiment. And I'm sure there were other criteria on the impact side. And I also loved your point about insulating that example within, as a line of business, so it wasn't impacting the whole. Is there anything else that you would add onto that answer of enabling experimentation, managing risk along the way, so that we feel more comfortable embracing non-perfection?
Yeah, embracing non-perfection. Exactly. I think it's something along the lines of sometimes you have to go slow in order to go fast. So in these particular situations, we're talking about kind of the guardrails we're putting around certain experiments and whatnot. But even when something is thriving and working, uh, to push the gas pedal too quickly, too far, can be a big challenge to culture. And so what do I mean by that? Like, let's take the affiliate program as an example, Cara Plus. Cara Plus, it became a bit of a shiny new object. But that shiny new object was only able to be shiny because it was rooted in a practice that had been informed by nearly 3 decades of refinement. And so what I didn't want to have happen, particularly in the early days, is for people that were in the direct programs that built a successful model from which Cara Plus became a possibility, to feel like they were being ignored along the way. And it is in those scenarios where we have to acknowledge from whence we came, that we have to acknowledge the but for the success of this model, this new innovation wouldn't be possible, and ensure that we're creating kind of communication inflection points where we're keeping people read in on why we might be tilting in a certain direction, and in what ways is it servicing that ultimate vision to fuel that courageous national movement to eradicate relational and financial poverty.
Fantastic. I love that, the but for. Building on what's come before and continuing to evolve it and scale it towards more impact. There's another question that popped up. I should know when I say guardrails. You have to set clear guardrails that somebody's going to ask, and Rachel asked the excellent follow-up question. How do you go about setting the guardrails? What advice, now you're definitely got your operator hat on here, what advice would you share with those in the audience about setting the appropriate guardrails to manage and encourage, but manage the risk of experimentation?
But I mean, particularly in the impact space, I think we're up against two dynamics that sometimes can be, competing. There's a financial imperative. You're trying to build something that is durable and sustainable. And then there's an impact imperative. You're trying to build something that matters, that is sustainable for the people that we're fighting for. And so, especially if you're trying to size an experiment that is relatively tight, you don't have years, you have months. You want to land on a probable leading indicator because you're likely not going to get to that lagging indicator. So for us, this was a small enough business to be able to say cash flow positive with it in 18 months wasn't hyperbolic. Like, that was achievable. We just didn't get there. And how did we come to that number? Because we studied similar businesses in the industry to try to get to some comps, if you will, and then gave ourselves like a discount factor because we were newbies in the business, et cetera, et cetera. So we took a precedent and then applied a discount, if you will, both on the impact and the business side, and that helped us get off the ground.
Fantastic. All right, I'm already looking at the time and it's flying by so quickly. So let me shift over to talk a little bit more about, we've talked about setting the vision, building the culture, managing the risk, and embracing experimentation through some of these guardrails. I also, though, want to focus on the people that are required for enabling innovation in an organization. And so we get lots of questions, and actually in the first webinar in the series, one of the questions we didn't have time to answer was one that was asking, is it better, as you think about trying to innovate towards scale, is it better to hire external people that you're bringing in with an entrepreneurial and innovative mindset, or is it better to take existing staff and try to train them in the innovation culture and process that you're hoping to have as a leader? How would you reflect on that?
I mean, I don't see a world where the answer isn't both and. That we have to both embrace a situation where we're helping folks to cultivate their internal innovator, I guess, their inside innovator. But to the extent that time is not on our side and we need to tag someone in from the outside, we also have to remember that whomever we bring in from the outside, even if they're the world's greatest expert in innovation, that they have to humble themselves to come into an organization with a student's mind. That their ability to walk in lockstep with what is already working inside an organization is directly proportional to their ability to have downstream impact at scale. And that if they don't do step one first, it's kind of it's an upside down, structure. It's not it. I don't know if those kinds of changes can be durable. I often say it's not just what we do, it's how we do it. So the way in which we get to that outcome is actually for the enterprise itself to be sustainable, to be in the work, to be fighting in this mission for periods of time. It needs to be cultivated and brought, to your point, in your framework. We need to bring everyone along the way.
Can you give us examples of when at Kara or REDF, how you've tackled the hiring or training? It's both end, like how has that actually played out in examples from your work?
Yeah, I mean, I would say at REDF, so for those less familiar, consider us like a venture philanthropy investing in employment social enterprises like Kara around the country. And we've got all kinds of folks on our staff that are super passionate about the work. And we ourselves are in the midst of a strategic planning process right now to envision our pathway to scale. And right now, the enterprises in our portfolio help, I think the last we counted, 133,000 people get back to the power of employment on pathways to economic mobility through these beautiful employment social enterprises around the country. The reality, though, is the challenge is 10 million folks face a compounding set of the barriers that we focus on, be it incarceration, be it homelessness, be it emerging adults, et cetera. 10 million versus 133,000, we have a ways to go. And so we're in this space where we're trying to figure out how do we both lean into our practice, what we do on the daily, this capital plus capacity building to help these businesses to grow? And how do we marry that with something that is more platform oriented, where we codify and take the best of what's working and just democratize the heck out of it, just democratize access to it via government institutions, via private employers to try to incentivize their adoption of these practices at more scale, et cetera, because it's only the combination of both that will get us in striking distance of that number.
Okay, fantastic. I love that. Um, Kenny just added a great question on this topic of the people that drive innovation. So his question is, what are your guiding principles when it comes to bringing in external talent? So if it's both end, we have to, grow from within and bring in external. On that external side, what are your guiding principles when it comes to bringing in that talent? And do you have any resources or tools that you can share? I know. I said this last time too. This crowd asked some really great and tough questions.
One thing I failed to say earlier that might be relevant here is when we bring in outside talent, there's always a shadow effect to that. Like outside talent, does outside talent coming in mean that I didn't have what you were looking for? Does the shiny object mean that every other object is dull? Which is clearly not what we're saying or not what we want to do. But so when we tag in an outside talent, I think the first step is to be really transparent with the team why we feel like this capability may not be present, at least at the level that we need in this moment in time. It doesn't mean that we're not trying to cultivate others to get there, but it means that the urgency with which we're trying to meet the pace of a certain challenge requires us to bring this capability in. So first, I might say transparency is key. And the second thing I might say is we're looking for culture additive nature. And so another principle I like to go by is we cannot teach where we do not go. So what do I mean by that? In the context of Kara, I'm going to have to think about what my analogy could be for REDF so that I can subject new colleagues to this measure. But in the context of Kara, when we brought folks in through the interview process, their kind of capstone interview was a community exercise that we all did with our participants in the morning. And it was a singing, clapping exercise called motivations, like often governed by a question of the day. The question might be something like, who or what gives you great joy? And folks are tapped randomly in these circles. They run into the middle. They share their answer in a way that hopefully is self-effacing, is building community, is embracing vulnerability. And then everybody kind of joins in and sings a song and celebrates that individual. Now, this is not your normal interview. But if you want somebody to ride or die with your mission, they're just coming in with a certain capability that may not be existing on the team, then you need to know that they can roll with the mission as it is, that they honor and respect kind of the community that you're trying to build. And then their capability is additive to the mix, not supplanting anything that might be in it. So something about, we cannot teach where we do not go principle could likely be in play with your talent acquisition processes.
Love that example. It also, the question and your answer makes me think of some work that we did here at Case Research called Scaling Pathways. And in that, we had the chance to interview a lot of impact enterprises around the world about how they were overcoming barriers to scale. And of course, one of those challenges of scale is having the right people on board. And so I remember, and we'll share in the link in the chat, a link to this paper. But we talked with Ella Goodwin, who's the president and CEO of an incredible global social enterprise, Vision Spring. And Ella talked about, they got to a stage of scale where they realized that they were limited in being able to train from within. They were, of course, doing that, but also needed at the point they were at the pace of scale and the work they were doing, needed to bring in external talent. But we're really worried about what you were just talking about, of how are they going to fit within the culture, and recognizing that having somebody that doesn't believe as deeply in the mission, play along in the culture of the organization, can be very toxic for an organization. And so Ella shared with us some of the tactics that she and her team use in recruiting external talent. And it was a framework, I guess I would say, that was called Why Vision Spring, Why Now, I think was the title of it. And it was 3 questions that they would ask in all of their interviews of external candidates. The first one was why are you joining a social enterprise? This is especially if somebody was coming from like the corporate world, right? Why are you joining a social enterprise at this point in your career? And seeing what the answer was to that. It was around what challenges do you see Vision Spring in this case experiencing, and how might you contribute to solving those problems? And so really seeing, does this candidate get who we are and what we do?
Yeah.
And in the solutions they're coming up with, do those feel like they are maybe different than what we've come up with, hopefully, but aligned with the way that our culture and our work operates? And then finally, the one that I think is most powerful was how will you know that Vision Spring or REDF or Cara Collective, how will you know that we're the right fit for you? So really making them reflect and articulate, how is this going to be the right fit or not for you? What does that look like in your eyes? And so all of that, just really thinking about, if we're bringing somebody in from the outside, there's incredible value in that, in the new perspectives they can bring, but there's also some danger. And so how do we think about the balance? So love that on top of the examples that you had shared as well. So thank you, Maria.
On that last point, Erin, like I would accept as a reasonable answer to that last question of, I don't know. But these are the questions that I'll hold in the first X months of being there to kind of help me to know. And I guess the other nuance, the lesson that I'm taking from what you just shared is what we're looking for is nuance and an ability to be moved. So like not somebody that is so fixed in where they are now and not able to be moved by the culture that they're kind of entering into, or the mission space that they're entering into. So it's like nuance and malleability are 2 things that I might be looking for as well.
Absolutely. Okay. I'm looking at my time and trying to decide where I go. There's more questions in the Q&A. I've got a million more questions I want to ask. Let me ask you about this concept from our initial framing around bringing everybody along. And so you've kind of touched on it through some of your answers, but I'm reflecting back on our first webinar in the series. We had Beth Anderson from the Hill Learning Center, talking about their innovation journey. And one of her reflections was that as they started to, continuing to have their educational program, their school program, and then they were innovating around packaging some of their reading program into a software, an e-commerce kind of tool that could be sold and licensed out, that there started to be a real disconnect in the organization. And they started to almost bifurcate in a way. And so one of her lessons learned was like, I should have done a better job of bringing everybody along. And so again, you touched on that a little bit earlier in the but for answer, but I want to ask it again just to see if you have any other reflections, and in particular, what I would love if you have like any tactics of like the way we bring people along. I've done X, Y, and Z that has worked or not worked.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go back to the strategy process that REDF is currently in. And so we did all the things that you might imagine, like the stakeholder interviews, yada, yada, to try to figure out the temperature of how people perceive us today and the aspirations they might want for us in the future. So we did a bit of a listening tour, but also we created an infrastructure, a steering committee that Deloitte is our partner, and they've said it is the most voluminous steering committee, the most diverse in terms of levels of the organization, representation, all the things. But we were really intentional around having a steering committee stacked, but still small enough to be mobile, but stacked with layers of the organization, including the board. stacked with representation of identity across the board, and stacked with representation of departments. So, like the scattering of business units across the enterprise. So, it's a representative group of folks whose job it is not just to opine in workshops where we're really trying to troubleshoot and speak to strategy, but also bring those imperfect conversations back to their respective teams to make sure there's a circular loop of communication. So we kind of go small, big, and then we bring it back up to staff meetings once a month. We are going into some of these thornier pathways, if you will, that we're navigating in order to try to bring everyone along. And in my brain, I kind of look at it as a fishboning exercise. And to keep myself honest, I'm trying to look at, for the person or persons I think might be hardest to bring along, are we being super intentional about fishboning all the way to them through multiple portals? Are there multiple points of entry? Because not everybody absorbs information in the same way, doesn't reflect on information in the same way, doesn't process information in the same way. So we want to create also diverse platforms where folks can contribute their questions, challenges, opinions. Kind of no red F or left behind is basically the point of this approach.
I love that. And I love that last reflection. We were just, myself and some of the team were in a series of workshops last week where we were talking a little bit about the personality types of individuals. And to that point of different personality types hear information differently and drive to action in different ways, maybe more people-centered versus task-centered, or those sorts of things. And so the concept of thinking about how you ensure communication both ways to and from even the hardest to reach person in the organization, and making sure that you're doing that through multiple channels and approaches so that different learning styles, different processing styles, different communication styles can be heard from and hear the lessons or the takeaways that you're trying to portray as a leader is a great point there. I'm gonna take Isabel's question from our Q&A. So she is asking, could you address where and how and whether tough love comes in as you create a strong, mission-led, innovative organizational culture? So what's the role? Is there a role, and what's the role of tough love? How do you think about that?
Wow. I mean, wow. That's a great question. So, I started with some confessions at the top of this call. My other confession is my bias on leadership is I tend towards a distributed leadership model. I don't want it to be like, oh, it's the pyramid up to the jazz hands, and the jazz hands is the kind of leader of the organization. But I feel like we're more durable, we're more sustainable as an enterprise to the extent we can have more distributed leadership across individuals in the org. I say that to say sometimes there's a shadow effect to that too, which is people are like, somebody needs to make a call. Who's holding the D here? Who's holding the decision? And so, Isabel, to your question about tough love, in this strategy process, for example, I've made it really clear to the steering committee, to the staff, like I ultimately am holding the D in this process. I'm holding the decision rights in this process. Ultimately, it's incumbent upon the board to approve or not approve the strategy plan as stated, but I'm holding the D of that final recommendation to them. So the steering committee, these other entities, they're what we call big Cs, big consultants to the process. But be clear, I'm holding the decision rights. Now, when we get to that day, we're not there yet. We're still in the clay of the molding and the shaping of the strategy. But when we get to that day, I imagine I'm going to have to employ some tough love, because in order for us to think about the practice and platform configuration that best positions us to scale, that does mean that we need to say no to certain things we might be doing today that people may love. And so how do I do that in such a way that still roots in our why? Here's where we're trying to go. So let's be clear on where we're trying to go first. And then from that, kind of do the cascading set of logic models, learning agendas, and thoughts that inform some of the micro decisions that need to be made along the way. But it will require some tough love, and I'm here for it, but I'm a little nervous too.
Yes, I think tough love is an important part of leadership, even and especially in the impact space, where so many ideas are good ideas that we can, do lots of great things for people, but the more dispersed we are in our approaches often, and less focused often, the less impact that results. So love that question, Isabel, on tough love. And also, as you were talking about distributed leadership, it just reminded me of the RACI model, the RACI, who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed in a leadership model or in a project to make sure everyone's coming along, but it's clear who has what did you say, the big D,
The big
the
D.
decision making power.
Yeah, we do Darcy instead of Racy to add the D, Darcy.
I love that. I love it. Leave it up to you to come up with a new frame and a new acronym.
No, that's not us. That's somebody smarter than us came up with that. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. We have 5 minutes left, so I need to do some wrap up, but let me ask you just one last thing, Maria. Is there anything we didn't cover? Any final sort of snippets of advice on developing an innovation culture to drive towards scale?
Maybe the last thing I'll share is I had the good fortune of going to the Grant Makers for Effective Organizations conference earlier this week, and there was a futurist there. If you're into futurism, her name was Trista Ryan, super compelling speaker. At any rate, she was helping to espouse the principles of futurism, like really imagining far into the future. What is the future that we want to create? And that becoming your galvanizing North Star to help everything kind of underneath it or as a part of it drive towards that change. And she kept elevating our gaze up and up and up and up. Like, what does the future look like 50 years from now, as opposed to how are we working on a plan that makes things 5% less bad than it was last year? And that tension, I'll leave your audience with. I would love for us to think between the space of 5% less bad to 50 years beautiful. What does that gap look like for you, and how are you kind of operationalizing that within your own impact space?
I love that. I mean, that brings us back to where we started this conversation. What's the vision that you're setting as a leader? And when we're talking about innovating to scale, the reason we're talking about that is because we're trying to push the boundaries on scale, to say like incremental change makes sense in some instances, but often the gap between where we currently are and the problem we're trying to solve is huge. And so how do we have that futurist approach, that grand vision? And often an innovative approach and an innovative culture can help create ideas and solutions to get us there. So thank you for that last reflection. I am going to briefly wrap us up. So just a couple of takeaways. We will share this and more with everyone that registered for this event. I'm going to click through. We talked about the components, a very simplified framework of how to create a culture to drive innovation at scale, enabling that innovation by setting the vision, which we just talked about, by cultivating curiosity and learning, by strategically structuring staff and board, in a great conversation about how do we think about bringing in external folks and some of the challenges and tensions and value that can bring, but also upskilling and training people within house. And then on implementing the innovation, great conversation about embracing experimentation and managing risk. How do you set those guardrails, the go, no-go metrics, ensuring alignment with both the financial goals as financial sustainability goals and impact metrics of an organization. Evolving and aligning staff along the way and bringing everyone along. Example of the steering committee meetings, and a little bit of tough love throughout all of it. So loved our conversation as always. We will follow up with more takeaways and some of the resources that were mentioned, including the scaling pathways work that I talked about earlier. And what I would love to do in our final 2 minutes is we would love to get everybody's feedback in a quick poll that is popping up in front of you. 3 questions, anonymous, but please take a moment to fill those out for us so we can improve this series as we move forward. Okay. Fantastic. I see people clicking away. Thank you. That'll remain open as we wrap up. And as we do wrap up, as we come to 1 minute left in our time, I wanted to remind everyone that we do have our next webinar in the series coming up 2 weeks from today. So Thursday, June 6th, same time, same virtual place. We'll be talking about financing innovation to scale, and the really hard question of, this is all great, how do we make it happen? How do we fund this work? So we'll have a good discussion on that topic. Look forward to seeing everyone there. And while everyone's continuing to complete that poll, hopefully you'll also join me in thanking the amazing Maria Kim for sharing all of your wonderful learnings and insights. It's been a pleasure to get to talk with you today. So thank you so much. Okay, great. Thank you all.